Through official secrecy and ridicule, many citizens are led to believe the unknown flying objects are nonsense.
Through his publishing company, Richard Dolan Press, public lectures, and media appearances, he combines historical analysis with geopolitical and futuristic perspectives, earning recognition as a leading voice in ufology.
Now, how much clearer a statement should responsible citizens, academicians, media, and political leadership require before demanding to get some reasonable answers as to what is going on behind the scenes in relation to the phenomenon of UFOs? Because the problem certainly did not end during the 1960s or 1970s or 1980s, but has continued to the present day. It's totally dead silent around him. He hears a kind of splashing sound. He turns and he sees this flying saucer that apparently had just come out of the water. It scared the hell out of him so bad. She said, my dad was never afraid of anything. It was her thing. He was the ultimate tough guy. Like in a tight spot, you want him. But yeah. This scared the hell out of him.
Two of my favorite things. Vetted has quickly become one of my favorite ufology podcasts, YouTube channels to watch every day. So seeing him interview Richard Dolan, who is, one of my all-time favorite ufologists ever. This was just too good to be true, really. Of course, Richard Dolan's talking about his new book, USOs. This wasn't the only podcast, that I saw him doing this week. So one of the cool things he's doing, is he's, telling you a lot of the USO stories while he's on the podcast and on his own podcast. This is his, YouTube channel, and I think he only tells, there might be only 2 kind of USO stories in there. There might be 3. There's not a lot, but pretty in depth. There's stories from the book that hasn't been published yet, and they don't really have a lot of illustrations yet, or any in some of them. So if you pay close enough attention to Richard Dolan, you can get, I think you would get half a dozen to a dozen USO stories that you haven't heard before, probably. Just this week from him. I saw him on the night shift. I doubt he's telling the same exact story on each one of his little podcasts. I haven't watched them all yet. This episode is 2 hours long, and at some point it becomes a Richard Dolan episode. So Betty did a great job of getting him to kind of just go. It was a little hard right at first, the dogs barking, but what can you do about that? So it's a definite kind of must watch, because he's going to tell you, he's got 2, there's really more, there's 4 stories probably in this episode with Vetted. Vetted kind of gets him off track at some point, talking to him about, cases where the UFOs are sucking up water, or if maybe they're not always sucking up water, maybe they're putting stuff in the water. I don't think Richard Dolan was ready for that, because he said he wasn't. He was like, "Oh, I don't know. Let me think." That wasn't one of the points in my spreadsheet, whether it was sucking or not sucking. But here's a UFO story that I know about the Catalina Islands, where a guy, saw a UFO and swam next to it, and it seemed like when he was swimming next to it, there was a part of the UFO that was sucking up water, and there was another part of the UFO when he swam by it that was putting out water. Like there was water going into the UFO and coming out. So I don't think that was planned. Maybe it was, right? Maybe they scripted this and they just do a good job delivering it. But it's fun times. If you're a ufology guy, this would be a good 2 hours to get stuck into. His episode this week was 40 minutes long. Get a couple more stories in there. Richard Dolan telling stories, and that's one of the things they actually talk about in the vetted interview. Is because he asked him if he did the audiobook for his new book, and Richard's like, no, like I couldn't. I don't have the time for it. I'm still working on audiobooks from books a decade ago. Even though I like it and I wish I could, I just can't. I'm already committed to even doing those, and I can't even get those done. So I'd agree with the vetted guy. He says he likes to listen to books better than read them, because he can do other stuff like walk his dog. But just listening to Richard Dolan tell UFO stories is it's got to be 75 to 90% of the fun of Richard Dolan. So here's another 40 minutes. You get 2 hours with what's his face, and then you get another 40 minutes of just Richard Dolan. And I'm sure if you went and picked up some of the other podcasts, you get a couple more hours of probably stories that he hasn't told you before. And if Richard Dolan hasn't told the story before, probably no one else really has. There's not a lot of stuff, ufology, UFO stories, alien stories out there that people are telling that he hasn't already told at some point in the last few decades. Some of the really fringe stuff, he doesn't cover every single topic that Linda Moulton Howe covers. He doesn't cover every topic, every alien interview that you could find on 4chan. I always point people towards Richard Dolan almost no matter what their ufology question really is. I'll say, well, there's a couple hours that you could watch on that topic from Richard Dolan, and it's going to have data in there that you can use. So big week. It's a big year. Richard Dolan, I said in the past, he's really feisty this year. He's got this book. I guess, you could go look. I haven't gone and looked, but probably all three of his books, I bet, come out this year. You can get the 3-pack at Christmas. Probably. If he's not doing that, he needs to. He needs to read his books out loud for audio books, and also get those things published faster. It better not take 3 years to get all three. It's 2025.